Well, I promised I was going to put together a video on this topic, and today, as they say, I guess it's time to go ahead and step on the third rail as I produce a video, probably two, about the whole topic of Battletech and wokeness. And to begin this series off, I want to look back at that whole debacle with Blaine Lee Pardoe from a few years ago and kind of explore one of the claims he made in a bit more detail than I think it has been covered up to this point. And well, why am I making this video right now? Well, I'll be honest with you guys. The crowdfunding project for my next set of 3D printable Fractured Colony gaming miniatures is live. You can find a link to that down in the description of this video, but we'll talk more about this a little bit later on. Finding wokeness is always kind of a tricky thing. Tim Pool, the fairly famous political commentator here on the internet, likes to describe it as basically what is the output of the modern day social media algorithms, because it just seems like that's where a lot of these ideas come from, where they become popular. And the reality is a lot of these different ideas that are classified as woke don't necessarily have a whole lot to do with each other. So I think there's definitely some truth there in how social media algorithms are pushing these ideas. But for Battletech, in practical terms, we're talking a lot about the LGBTQIA+ issues and a rejection or hostility towards conservative positions and ideas. Now, I put that second point there because in the United States today, many conservatives, including President Trump, are supportive of marriage equality. Now, the most famous Battletech and wokeness issue happened several years ago with a long-time and very popular author, Blaine Lee Pardoe. He's a major part of the Battletech story, and his first novel was published way back in 1995. And he happens to be a strong supporter of President Trump and the MAGA agenda. And sometime a few years before this all began, he got into, I guess what you call an online debate, argument, fight, I'm not really sure how you want to classify it, with a Battletech community member who used to go by the name Faith McLoxy. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm not 100% sure. And Blaine tells his side of the story in several blog posts and articles that he wrote. Now, I'm not sure exactly when all this began, but he started writing about it in July of 2021. So here's one of those such posts from his own personal blog, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the things that Blaine has to say about this situation. What follows is a story about lies, deceit, catfishing, defamation of character, extreme leftist politics, threats against my life, and outright character assassination. It is a story about cancel culture, censorship, and standing up for your rights. At the time Blaine is writing here, he is still a Battletech author, just as a note. Now we're going to look at some comments from Blaine about this person he's getting into a fight with, and essentially he is saying this person is not who they say that they are. Leading this charge was somebody known as Faith McLoxy, and it's important for you to know that Faith McLoxy does not exist. And then you got a bunch of very specific comments about who this person is and is not, according to Blaine Lee Pardoe. And then this post goes on with a whole bunch of more very details and accusations about Blaine and who he thinks this person is, and the evidence that he has presented about why he thinks this person is who they are, and then some of the comments that this person has said to them that definitely don't look particularly great. And then we see here Blaine's response to this whole situation in this post. In response to multiple threats, I retained a top-notch legal team and secured a temporary PPO, which is Virginia's equivalent of a restraining order. A cease and desist letter was served to Jay. Jay is being kind of the ID that Blaine is assigning to this person in this article, demanding him to remove his inflammatory online comments and a specific lengthy blog post that was filled with lies and distorted mistruths about me. Other legal actions were prepared as well. This post was not the only time that Blaine Lee Pardoe wrote about this situation. If we jump forward to the middle of 2022, so about a year later, we find out that he will no longer be working with Catalyst Game Labs and that this was not a mutual decision. So here is that post right there. I'm just going to read the first paragraph for you guys. By now, many of you know the story or parts of it. Going forward, I will no longer be writing Battletech for Catalyst Game Labs, CGL. This was not a mutual decision. A handful of people, led by Faith Niklotsky, protested when my latest novel, No Substitute for Victory, was published. That backlash led to Fanatics, owner of the IP, telling Catalyst to make this go away. So we jump down a little bit further here, and what we have is a series of notes that Blaine made on a call with Catalyst Game Labs. And that conversation, well, that can be found right here. And as Blaine says, you can form your own opinion. And he also includes this screenshot right here. And this pertains to a comment, according to Blaine, that he got from Catalyst Game Labs about his other series of books, or one of his other series of books, Blue Dawn, which definitely has a very strong political message to it. Now, I'm going to get back to this post in just a little bit, but what else do other entities and other people who are involved in this whole situation have to say? Now, after Blaine's relationship with Catalyst Game Labs was terminated, Faith went ahead and wrote a blog post about the situation on their personal blog. In particular, they refuted a few points that I think were made by some of the commentators talking about this whole mess and not Blaine himself. Now, this particular post was deleted sometime later, but of course, on the internet, nothing is really ever gone for good, and you can find it in the various internet archives out there if you really want to read it. If you're hoping to find a post that exonerates this person, I really don't think, in my opinion from reading it, that this is exactly what this post was about, but it is there if you want to go ahead and take a look at it. Just as a general rule, in my opinion, when it comes to interacting with people over the internet, and some of the lessons we can kind of learn about this whole mess, is that I highly discourage people from making threats against someone else's life in any context, even if maybe you think it was a joke or not, and combining that with very angry comments about their political views. That's a very bad combination there that can get you in a lot of trouble. Now, moving on, because we've talked about a couple of viewpoints here, but Catalyst Game Labs themselves have had a few things to say about this situation. And what's interesting is, once again, we have the reoccurring theme that on the internet, nothing is really deleted forever. Now, this post was written on the 30th of July, 2022, and the topic, Statement Regarding Blaine Lee Pardoe. And Cubby, at least at the time, I'm not sure if they still are employed with Catalyst Game Labs or not, but at the time they were a Catalyst Games Lab employee, and I looked a little bit into their bio, and I believe that they would often write those little bios that you would find on the little tiny pilot cards that you got in the game, just if you're curious who this person was. And this post, though, would be deleted sometime in over the next year or so, but it reads, Catalyst Game Labs recently suspended publishing new works by longtime Battletech author Blaine Lee Pardoe, primarily due to Mr. Pardoe's online activities which do not align with Catalyst publishing vision. This has nothing to do with Pardoe's quality of work or ongoing sales or, as reported elsewhere, his personal feuds with other fans of the Battletech brand. Mr. Pardoe has been instrumental to the Battletech IP over the years, and we wish him well in his ongoing professional career. This decision was made in consultation with Topps Entertainment, owner of the Battletech intellectual property, but final determination was made by Catalyst Game Labs. Now, given that this post would be deleted at some point in the not too distant future, we can maybe take a few guesses as to why that was, but this is kind of speculation, and I don't have any evidence to prove any of these things. One, maybe the facts of this post, for one reason or another, were wrong. Two, it's quite possible that Cubby was not authorized to actually speak on behalf of Catalyst Game Labs. Now, I'm pretty sure this post did sit up for a while, so that's probably not the case, but it's always a possibility. Or simply there could be some other reason as to why Catalyst Game Labs decided to delete this particular post. Now, a while later on the Renegade HPG podcast, Lauren Coleman, who runs Catalyst Game Labs, was asked to give a comment on the Blaine Lee Pardoe situation, and unsurprisingly, he had nothing more specific to give on the situation, this comment that we already have, because as a general rule, companies are not going to give detailed specifics as to why they severed a relationship with a person or some other company. There will be a link down in the description of the video if you want to watch that portion of the interview. Lauren does say this decision was made in consultation with the license holder. This is something I've kind of mentioned a few times, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But before we get to that, I just want to mention in a bit more detail about the Kickstarter campaign I'm currently running for my next set of 3D printable Fractured Colony gaming miniatures. This guy right over here, this is an alternative version of the Griffin hover tank. And this guy right here is the Manticore. It is an infantry fighting vehicle that carries the Norman class battle suit. Now the one thing about all these miniatures is that they're designed to be printed on FFF 3D printers with minimal amounts of support. So if that sounds interesting to you, head over to fracturedcolony.com or check out the link in the description of the video below to find out how you can support this crowdfunding campaign. All right, let's get back to the main topic. So we're going to go back to Blaine's moving forward post here in just a moment, but I want to ask you one question first. Who actually owns the Battletech intellectual property? Now, if you're going to say Topps, you're actually incorrect. They did hold Battletech's IP, and they held it for quite a while, about 16 years after they purchased WizKids and shut the original WizKids company down for, that was a long time ago. But in early 2022, Topps was acquired by a company called Fanatics, and we see that name dropped here in Blaine's post. And this was that line that I read a little bit ago. That backlash led to Fanatics, owner of the IP, telling Catalyst to make this go away. Now the year is not actually appearing in this press release, but this is January 4th, 2022. Fanatics acquires Topps trading card and collectible business. Apparently Topps has some other things in terms of making gum and things like that, and that got spun off as a separate company. But the Battletech license was part of this acquisition. So there is a temporal correlation there, but of course correlation is not necessarily evidence or proof that they were behind this whole situation. It should be pointed out that Catalyst Game Labs is mostly Battletech. The crowdfunding projects for Battletech bring in millions of dollars. I mean, I guess there is Shadowrun, but that is also Fanatics. At the time I'm recording this video, a new Shadowrun project has launched. Now, I don't know what it's going to end up being, but right now, one day into the campaign, it's at $128,000-ish, but it probably won't end up being several million like the Battletech crowdfunding campaigns. And then, of course, they have Leviathans, which is their original game, and the crowdfunding campaign is finally shipping after several years. Now, this is a relaunch of a game they created a number of years ago that didn't do particularly well. As we can see here, it did bring in around $623,000 with a planned launch of 2 years ago. The takeaway here is that if Catalyst Game Labs was to lose the Battletech license, it would be a serious blow and quite possibly a knockout blow to their company. While this does show that Fanatics has a lot of leverage over them, once again, this is not evidence to this whole situation. Then we can ask the question, would Fanatics want to shut down an author that has a pro-MAGA agenda viewpoint? Well, let's take a look at this page right here. It's under corporate responsibility. The URL is diversity-inclusion, and it's their, quote, idea page, which is essentially just a rebranded DEI concept page. Now, just because a company has these kind of things on their website doesn't mean they're, quote, true believers in wokeness, because some companies just use all these ideas as marketing to appeal to a certain group of people, and they really don't actually implement these policies very much in their business. Let's take a look at a few more things. On their website, they have bio pages for all of their leadership team, and right here, this is Michael Rubin. He is the founder and chief executive officer of Fanatics. Now, there's one thing I want to point out on this guy's bio, and it's going to lead us down a bit of an interesting chain of investigation. If we scroll down here, he's also, in addition to his work and running the Fanatics company, Michael serves as the co-founder and co-chair of Reform Alliance, an organization with some of the biggest names in sports, business, and culture. Reform Alliance is dedicated to advancing criminal justice reform and eradicating antiquated probation laws that perpetuate injustice in the United States. If we jump over to Wikipedia, we can find the Reform Alliance page, talk about this organization, how it was founded in 2019. And there is one note here. Unfortunately, the source for this particular note has since been deleted, so I can't confirm if this one line is 100% accurate, but what you'll notice down here is under work. Reform Alliance focuses on passing legislation to reform the probation and parole laws of the United States. And we saw a comment about that just a moment ago on the Fanatics site. The organization works alongside other criminal justice groups as Cut 50 and the American Conservative Union. The American Conservative Union is a bit more than just a criminal justice group. The American Conservative Union is an American political organization that advocates for conservative policies, ranks politicians based on a level of conservatism, and organizes the Conservative Political Action Conference. Now, the last thing right there is commonly referred to as CPAC, and it's often seen as basically being the meeting of Satan's minions each year for people who are in the Democratic Party and who are on the left. Earlier this year, famously or infamously, that is where Elon Musk ran around on stage with a chainsaw and then more or less failed to cut the size of the federal government over the next few months. The point being is that a true DEI person would not work with this organization. They see it as the source of all evil because of the strange antics that have occurred here over the years, and of course because people like President Trump come and speak here pretty much every year. So we end up in this situation where Fanatics seems to be pro-DEI, but it's quite possible that some of their leadership is not, and maybe it is a whole marketing thing, but that doesn't necessarily prove or disprove Blaine's idea that Fanatics pressured Catalyst Game Labs to terminate the relationship between him and CGL. At the end of the day, the honest reality is we kind of end up with a story that's got a lot of blank spots in it, and I think most people are probably going to take a look at what their political viewpoints are and fill in those blank spots with what they want to hear or what they want to imagine actually happened. Finally, why does this matter, and why does it seem like people really care about wokeness these days? Well, the reality is that things have changed quite a bit over the past 20 years. The LGBTQIA+ movement is really no longer about what people do in private. Children are getting involved in a variety of ways, and some of these ways will drastically affect those children for the rest of their life. I'm not going to go a whole lot in detail more about that in this video. I'll talk a little bit more about it in the second and last video in this series because it's a bit more relevant there. But if you're not really sure what I'm talking about, well, I would suggest you start doing some reading on the topic. As for getting rid of Blaine Lee Pardoe, well, he was my most favorite Battletech author. Fun little fact is that he grew up in the state of Michigan and would often hide references to Michigan in his Battletech novels. In the case of Hour of the Wolf, there's a very important scene that occurs at Belle Isle, which is an incredibly famous park here in the state of Michigan. And by Catalyst Game Labs kind of kicking him out as an author, well, it's going to draw people away from Battletech and to other franchises. I've had this book hiding here in the backdrop of the video, and well, I'm a little late to the Land and Sea party, and I'm about a little less than halfway through it. But I've definitely been enjoying what I have been reading. Haven't found the Michigan reference yet. Not sure if there's one in here, but maybe, just maybe, we'll come across one. Granted, getting sales data for books it's not something that's super easy to do, but every so often I do look on Amazon to compare the sales of the Land and Sea series versus the most recent Battletech novels, and for the handful of times that I have checked things, these books do appear to be outselling Battletech, and that's not really a great thing for Catalyst Game Labs in the long run. Now, in some ways, this whole situation has been a bit of a warning shot for every single company out there. In the Renegade HPG interview, Loren Coleman did say that he doesn't want to play politics with Catalyst Game Labs, and he's probably right about that. I guess if you really want to read between the lines, and I mean like really read between them, maybe you can argue that's him pointing the finger back up at Fanatics and saying it's their fault that Blaine got fired, but that's definitely some wild speculation and something that he did not say in the interview. There really is no advantage for most companies to go ahead and pick sides in this modern day political culture war. The thing is, Loren Coleman also said he's a fan of political discourse and discussion, and if he's seeing the same things I'm seeing, well, The idea that a company can sit in the sidelines and not pick sides, that may be coming to an end sooner than we think. All right, well, that's about all I have for you on this particular topic. I think to some extent when it comes to the firing of Blaine Lee Pardoe, I'm pretty sure most people have made up their minds one way or another. And as I mentioned earlier, you're going to see the holes in the story or the incomplete data in the story and fill in what you want to fill in there. But the likelihood is that we'll never know exactly what happened unless more information is indeed leaked about this particular situation. So with that, thank you guys all for watching. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield, and head over to fracturedcolony.com or check out the link in the description below for the crowdfunding campaign for my most recent set of 3D printable Fractured Colony gaming miniatures. All right, I'll see you guys all next time.